Long before the first pharaoh pressed his seal into Nile clay, before the great pyramids rose to split the desert sky, the gods themselves walked among the living. Egypt was not yet a kingdom of men. It was a kingdom of heaven made manifest, a land of black, fertile soil and golden light, governed by beings whose very breath was law. And at the center of this divine order sat Osiris, first among gods, beloved of the earth. He was not merely a ruler, he was the reason the grain grew, the reason the flood returned each year, the reason death itself had meaning. His was a reign of abundance, of order, of love. But perfection, even among gods, casts a shadow. Osiris was given dominion over the living world by his father Geb, the earth, and his mother Nut, the sky. From them, he inherited both the solidity of stone and the infinite depth of stars. He taught humanity to cultivate wheat and barley. He gave them law and ceremony and the knowledge of how to honor the gods who breathed life into the world. Wherever he walked, the land answered. The floods came in their season. The crops rose in their rows. People worshipped him not from fear, but from gratitude, a thing rare among gods. His queen, Isis, stood beside him as his equal, her wisdom the dark water beneath his brilliant light. Together they were the axis around which all Egyptian life revolved, but not all gods were nourished by the same soil. Set had been born screaming from his mother's side before his time, tearing himself into existence with a violence that seemed to announce everything he would become. He was the lord of the desert, the red land beyond the black, where nothing grew and the sun was not a blessing, but a weapon. He governed storms and chaos, the howling emptiness between oases, the place where travelers lost their way and never returned. He was not evil in the beginning. Chaos has its place in the order of things. But Set had always lived in the long shadow of his brother, and a god who rules over emptiness will eventually hunger for what others possess. The ancient texts do not record the precise moment Set's love for his brother curdled into something poisonous. Perhaps it was gradual, a slow accumulation of grievances, each one small enough to dismiss, yet each one leaving its mark. Every feast where Osiris sat at the head of the table, every prayer offered to the green god while the desert lord received only the oblations of soldiers and scorpion keepers. Set had a wife, Nephthys, sister of Isis, sister of Osiris, his own blood. But even she, it is whispered, had lain with Osiris once, in error or in longing. From that union came Anubis, jackal-headed god of the dead, raised in secret and in shame. Set knew, and what a god knows, a god does not forget. Set did not act in rage. That is perhaps the most chilling thing about what followed. He planned it with the patience of a craftsman, the cold precision of a mind that has rehearsed its crime 10,000 times in the dark. He commissioned a chest, a magnificent sarcophagus of cedar and ebony and gold, decorated with the most exquisite carvings that Egyptian artisans had ever produced. Every measurement was calculated with meticulous care. The chest was built to fit one body and one body only, the body of Osiris, measured secretly while the god-king slept. Set then arranged a grand feast, a celebration of brotherhood and abundance. He invited 72 conspirators to his hall. He invited Osiris himself. The hall was magnificent. Set had spared nothing. The finest meats, the rarest wines from the delta, musicians playing instruments of ivory and gold, dancers whose movements recalled the sacred rites of Hathor. Osiris arrived in good faith, as a king does when his brother extends his hand. The 72 conspirators were already in place, smiling their practiced smiles. Set was the perfect host, generous, warm, present in the way that only those who are performing greatness can be. And when the feast was at its height, when the wine had flowed and the laughter was genuine, Set rose and made his announcement. He had a gift for the most worthy guest, the magnificent chest. Whoever fit within it perfectly, he declared, would keep it as a treasure beyond measure. One by one, the guests attempted to lie within the chest. One was too tall, another too broad. A third could not close the lid above him. The conspirators played their roles well, genuinely bemused, genuinely delighted by the game. And then Osiris, curious and unhurried in the way of those who believed themselves safe, stepped forward. Perhaps he saw no threat. A chest is only a chest. A brother is only a brother. He lowered himself into the cedar darkness and found, with a quiet surprise, that it fit him perfectly, as if made for him, which, of course, it had been. He lay still for a moment, perhaps savoring the game. In that moment, 72 pairs of hands moved at once. The lid slammed shut. Lead was poured into the seams. Set did not bury the chest. He cast it into the Nile. This was deliberate. The river was the artery of Egyptian life, the sacred water that Osiris himself had blessed. To give it Osiris's corpse was an act of profound desecration, a perversion of the very thing the god-king represented. The sealed chest floated north through the delta, borne by currents that had no knowledge of what they carried. It passed through the rushes and the papyrus stands. It drifted past sleeping villages where people dreamed of their green god without knowing he lay sealed in darkness above them. Eventually, the currents carried the chest out of Egypt entirely, into the open sea, and the sea carried it east, all the way to the shores of Byblos, in the land now called Lebanon. Isis knew before she was told. Grief, like hers, is not received. It erupts. It was in the quality of the silence when Osiris did not return, in the way the grain in the royal stores seemed to exhale something essential, in the birds that altered their migrations without cause. She did not wait for a messenger. She cut off a lock of her hair in the ancient gesture of mourning and set out to find what the world had taken from her. Isis was not merely a grieving widow. She was the greatest magician who had ever existed among gods or men. Her name meant throne. She was the very foundation of kingship. And she would search every shore, every current, every shadow of the known world until she reclaimed what was hers. She searched as only Isis could, through transformation, through cunning, through the relentless application of a goddess's will. She questioned marshland children who had seen a chest of gold float past in the night. She consulted the ibis and the crocodile. She walked in disguise through markets and temples, listening for the thread of rumor that would lead her to the truth. She wandered north through the delta, past the mouths of the Nile, onto the shores of a sea that knew nothing of Egypt's grief. And there, in Byblos, she heard it, the story of a great tamarisk tree that had grown overnight around a mysterious object washed ashore, grown so beautifully that the king of that land had it cut to form the pillar of his palace. The tree had grown around the chest, around Osiris. Isis revealed herself to the king and queen of Byblos, not in her full divine terror, but in the measured grace of a goddess who understands that power wielded gently achieves more than power wielded with force. She had endeared herself to the royal household, serving as nurse to their infant son. Now she made her request. The pillar, the great tamarisk column at the heart of the palace. The bewildered king gave it freely, awed by the goddess who wept as his servants split the wood. Inside, perfectly preserved within cedar and silence, lay the sealed golden chest. Isis clasped it to her, and in that embrace the world trembled, not with earthquake, but with the profound disturbance of love reuniting with its lost object, even across the boundary of death. Alone with the chest in the reeds of the delta, Isis opened the lid and beheld her husband for the first time since his murder. The body of Osiris had not decayed. This was his first impossible mercy, the god of life refusing, even in death, to fully surrender to corruption. She spread her great wings above him, for Isis could take the form of a sacred kite, and the beating of those wings pushed breath, pushed warm air, pushed the memory of life into the body beneath her. The texts say she drew from him, in that moment, a final seed of divinity. She conceived their son, Horus, conceived him from a dead god's last breath and a mother's refusal to accept the finality of loss. Then she sealed the chest and hid it in the marshes and went to find her son's birthplace. But Set had not finished. Gods of chaos are nothing if not persistent. He came upon the chest by chance, or perhaps by a hunter's instinct, that particular sensitivity to something hidden that belongs to those who have always lived in the margins. He was hunting boar in the delta marshes under a full moon when the moonlight caught gold in the reeds. He recognized it immediately. His jaw tightened with a fury that was not rage, but something colder. The fury of a plan that has survived one obstacle only to find another has appeared in its place. He opened the chest. He looked upon the face of the brother he had murdered. And then Set did something that the ancient world would never forgive him for. He dismembered the body of Osiris into 14 pieces and scattered them across all of Egypt. 14 pieces. Some accounts say 42, one for each nome, each province of Egypt, as though Set wanted to plant his brother's destruction into the very geography of the land. The Nile received some fragments. The desert claimed others. A piece was carried to Abydos, another to Memphis, another to the delta shores. One piece, the texts say with careful delicacy, was eaten by a Nile perch, lost to the river's hungry dark forever. This last detail horrified the ancient Egyptians above all others. The loss of that singular piece meant Osiris could never be wholly reconstituted, never be fully returned to the wholeness death requires for resurrection. Set had not merely killed his brother twice. He had designed a wound that eternity itself could not entirely heal. Isis did not search alone the second time. Her sister Nephthys, wife of Set, lover of Osiris, mother of Anubis, came to her side. The sisterhood between them transcended the war of their husbands. In the ancient hymns, Isis and Nephthys appear as two kites, crying over the body of their lost god, and their cries become the very template for the funeral wailing that Egyptian women would perform for thousands of years over their own dead. Together, the two goddesses combed the length and breadth of Egypt. Wherever they found a piece of Osiris, Isis used her magic to reconstruct it, to bind it with linen, to preserve it with the oils of resurrection. Anubis himself, the jackal-headed guide of the dead, joined them, tending to his father's dismembered form with a son's devotion. What Isis and Nephthys accomplished together became the template for all Egyptian death ritual. They gathered 13 of the 14 pieces. They cleaned and anointed each one with cedar oil and myrrh. They bound them with linen that Isis had woven herself, linen infused with spells older than the gods who spoke them. For the missing piece, Isis fashioned a substitute from gold, because, even incomplete, Osiris deserved to be made whole. Anubis presided over the wrapping, and in doing so became the god of mummification for all time. When the work was complete, the reconstituted body of Osiris lay wrapped and sealed, no longer quite alive and no longer quite dead. He existed now in a third state, the first mummy, the first of the justified dead, the lord of a realm that had not existed before him. He did not return to the living world. This is the part of the story that the ancient Egyptians understood with a gravity we sometimes lose in the telling. Osiris was resurrected, but his resurrection was not a return. He became king of the dead, lord of the Duat, the underworld through which every Egyptian soul must journey. He sat enthroned in the Hall of Two Truths, green-skinned and wrapped in white linen, holding the crook and flail, the symbols of kingship translated into the language of eternity. He could receive the dead. He could weigh their hearts against the feather of Ma'at. He could grant them passage into the field of reeds, but he could not return to the sunlit world above. The murder had not ended. It had simply been redirected. But Isis had not wept without purpose. In the marshes of Chemis, hidden from Set's searching eyes, she raised the child she had conceived in that desperate miracle above the open chest. Horus, the falcon-headed god, his eyes the sun and moon, grew in secret, protected by his mother's spells and the reeds of the delta. He grew knowing exactly who he was, and exactly what had been taken from his family. The murder of Osiris did not end the story. It began the second story, the story of vengeance and legitimacy, of the long war between Horus and Set that would shake the divine order for 80 years before the gods rendered their judgment. The death of a king creates a vacuum, and into that vacuum steps either chaos or an heir. While Isis mourned and searched and raised her hidden son, Set ruled. He sat upon the throne of Egypt in the manner of usurpers throughout history, loudly, defensively, always watching the door. He was not an incompetent ruler. Chaos has its uses. The desert winds he commanded kept Egypt's enemies at bay. His storms watered the outer lands. But something had left the world with Osiris, some essential quality of rightness, of things being in their proper place. The priests felt it in their rituals. The farmers felt it in years when the flood came too high or too low. The scribes felt it in the difficulty of recording truth under a king whose own story was a lie. Set had won the kingdom. But a kingdom built on a brother's blood is a kingdom that knows, in its deepest foundation, that it is waiting to be reclaimed. The murder of Osiris was not merely a crime between brothers. It was the wound at the center of Egyptian cosmology, the event that made death real, that made resurrection necessary, that made justice not merely desirable, but cosmically essential. Every mummy wrapped in white linen was a tribute to what Isis had done for Osiris. Every tomb painted with the journey through the Duat was a map drawn from his passage. Every pharaoh who claimed the throne of Egypt claimed it in the name of Horus, son of the murdered king. And Set, powerful, necessary, never truly defeated, remained part of the story, because darkness is never truly defeated, only balanced. This is the gift of the myth, not that evil is punished, but that love, even shattered and scattered across a continent, refuses to stop searching. In the end, it always finds what it lost.